Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Project Sustain, an intervention development study to enhance working conditions for special education teachers. Our goal is to share findings and learn from you about the feasibility and usefulness of Sustain. To save time, we won't introduce ourselves individually, but we're researchers at the University of Florida, Boston University, and Florida International University. Today, we'll overview project context and goals before sharing sustained content adapted from your input this fall, after which we'll ask you to return to complete the survey.
Working conditions are the job responsibilities that special educators fulfill and the resources they experience as a result of how their school is organized to structure and coordinate teachers' work. What we find is that often their responsibilities and their resources are not balanced. They have more responsibilities than they have resources to fulfill. So, for example, one special educator was teaching multiple subjects and grade levels with almost no prep time. And she shared with us, I open the book that day and go, all right, what are we going to learn today? Because I don't have any prepping time. So the expectations placed on her, the instructional expectations placed on her, were not supported with adequate time and materials to be able to fulfill those expectations well. Another special educator shared with us, when we're not properly staffed, my co-teacher and I a lot of times give up lunches and preps so we can support our students. They didn't have enough time in their day to be able to meet all of their students' needs and still take their contractually obligated break times. Over time, what special educators wind up doing is triaging responsibilities, choosing which responsibilities to fulfill well and which to let go. They also intend to engage in lower quality instruction when their responsibilities outweigh their resources. Triaging and providing lower quality instruction leads to stress. No one got into this job to do it badly, to triage students' needs. That is very stressful. And over time, that stress leads to burnout and ultimately to attrition. Special educators who are persistently having to balance excessive responsibilities with insufficient resources ultimately are more likely to choose to leave the job. And that's expensive for districts. It's not only costly to the special educator, it's costly to the district as well, which has to spend money hiring new folks, training new people. Over time, those expenses really add up. It also leads to weaker student outcomes, both because students are receiving lower quality instruction when their special educators are overtaxed, and also because when special educators leave at a high rate, students are more likely to be taught by less experienced special education teachers. There are lots of different responsibilities that special educators have on their plates. Things like paperwork responsibilities, supervising paraeducators, managing their caseloads, and instructional responsibilities. These are really important responsibilities for meeting students' needs. They also have a lot of different resources potentially available to them to help them meet those responsibilities, such as protracted planning time, access to curricular resources, mentoring, and administrative support. And each of these is an opportunity for intervention. So if a special educator, for example, is struggling with excessive paperwork responsibilities, perhaps their caseload complexity and paperwork responsibilities could be reduced. If they're struggling with supporting paraeducators, perhaps their role for supporting paraeducators could be clarified. And you can imagine a number of other interventions that you could engage in, depending on which responsibilities they were struggling with and which resources they lacked. But the basic idea is that by balancing responsibilities and resources, we can potentially reduce burnout and attrition, and thereby enhance the outcomes of the special education teachers, the students who special education teachers serve. And that brings us to Sustain.
Now we're going to talk about the framework and timeline for Sustain. To reduce burnout and attrition and enhance student outcomes, we are adapting Sustain from an existing intervention. Our focal participants are special education teachers working with students with EBD in self-contained settings, and the school leaders who has decision-making responsibilities for special education in their school. We anticipate a schedule for 6 meetings for a total of roughly 6 hours across the school year. Here we have illustrated the intervention steps, which are mapped onto meetings. We'll go into more detail about each of these meetings and steps throughout this video. The first 3 steps will occur in a planning meeting during the fall with the core team, which will be facilitated by one of our research team members. These 3 steps include setting team norms, identifying workload concerns, and generating possible solutions. They would then work between meetings to check in on any follow-up questions and determine resources needed for any identified possible solutions. During the launch meeting, the team will rank and prioritize solutions, plan the implementation of solutions, determine how they'll know if these solutions are actually working, and then implement them. Moving forward, the team will have monthly check-in meetings to evaluate implementation, surface any issues, and revise as needed, and celebrate successes. On this slide is the Sustain calendar. Based on your feedback from the fall, flexibility is key. For example, some schools may want to do the planning meeting during a summer in-service day, while others may prefer to hold it during a fall workday. After the planning meeting, the team will assess feasibility of all solutions and ensure the necessary resources are available. The team will then hold the launch meeting around the winter break to prioritize solutions and enact them, and then have monthly check-ins throughout the spring. We, as facilitators, will serve to support these meetings.
Our goals of the planning meeting are to ensure teams have strong collaborative norms to facilitate positive team dynamics, and to identify causes for their burnout or challenging working conditions, as well as potential solutions to those causes. There is flexibility for the team for each school to meet independently, but from your feedback in the fall, we agree that it would be ideal for multiple schools teams from the same district to conduct their planning meeting concurrently, but at separate tables within a large room. We would have a research team member lead the PowerPoint presentation at the front of the room, while each school team would sit together at a round table with another research team member serving as a facilitator for their team. Having multiple schools meet together would allow district personnel to be available for questions and to demonstrate support for Sustain. The meeting would begin with the agenda and introductions, as well as the content that we just shared in this video. Based on your feedback from the fall, we will also provide participants with optional pre-work to learn about Sustain and generate ideas for challenges and solutions prior to arriving for the planning meeting. Then we will have an opening activity led by an expert in setting the stage for successful group dynamics for collaboration. As a starting point, everyone on each school's team will then be asked to write the fear they had coming into the day on a piece of paper. Team members can share those fears with each other or not, but then will be asked to place them in water, at which point the paper will dissolve. We considered framing around concerns instead of fears. However, participants may have many concerns, and it's helpful for them to identify the one main thing they may be afraid of that might otherwise impede their engagement with their colleagues in Sustain. The first step of Sustain is to set norms. Because we heard this fall that teachers and school leaders' main concern is time, we are planning to provide drafted norms that research has supported for collaboration for each team to work from. They'll then have time with their facilitator to decide if they want to remove, add, or edit them. They currently include empathy, confidentiality, adaptability, weight, and brave and accountable. We welcome your feedback on these and this process, as these are a critical building block for teams to refer back to throughout the process. Next, we briefly share with participants our commitments to them and what they can expect us to do throughout the project before taking a moment with the team to understand their goals, so that everyone can hear what undergirds each other's actions, as well as what they perceive as an obstacle getting in the way of their goals before beginning the next step. For participants' answers provided that relate to working conditions, the facilitator will highlight that Sustain is designed to help address those. For obstacles outside of the workplace, we'll mention that although those are beyond our scope, enhancing work supports and streamlining responsibilities can reduce stress and burnout overall.
Then we'll begin step 2, where we'll identify workload concerns and opportunities. First, we'll briefly provide some framing to ensure we're grounded in what we can achieve. Then we'll begin a root cause analysis, which is the approach we'll use to identify the underlying causes of an issue. At this point, the facilitators at each table will lead an open-ended discussion with participants to identify sub-issues leading to their concern, which may be burnout, challenging working conditions, or something similar. Facilitators will have a chart paper or standing whiteboard so that they can work through this process with participants. We've allocated 45 minutes for this activity. After a 10-minute break, teams will return to brainstorm solutions. First, presenters will briefly provide an example of this process before turning it over to facilitators to guide their teams through solutions, brainstorming again using the whiteboard. Teams will then have 40 minutes to brainstorm solutions. Facilitators will guide teams in ensuring that solutions address concerns identified during step 2.
Participants shared this fall that some teams may want support generating ideas. So, during solutions brainstorming, they'll have access to the decision tree that we've developed. This would be supplemental and used as a scaffold if teams struggle in identifying sub-issues. The decision tree leads teams through a series of questions about what challenges they're experiencing, helping them to hone in on a specific working condition, and eventually leading them through a series of questions that help them define a potential solution.
After brainstorming solutions, we'll introduce the template participants will use to evaluate the feasibility and usefulness of different solutions, and we'll complete one example as a group. Team members will have the opportunity to select solutions that they want to explore further and may take responsibility for exploring the feasibility of a specific solution in between the planning and launch meetings. Then we'll wrap up the meeting, finalize the communication plan, and wrap with a closing activity where each participant writes down their takeaway from the day. That wraps the planning meeting, which we currently have 2.5 hours allocated to complete. Whew, that was a lot of important content. If you want to take a minute and pause, please do. Otherwise, we'll continue with step 4.
During step 4, the school team members will follow through with a plan made during their planning meeting by reaching out to relevant district leaders, school personnel, or colleagues to obtain more information related to identified solutions, such as needed supports and/or feasibility. For instance, if one potential solution is to ensure student coverage during the special educator's planning time, the school leader might meet with paraeducators or other relevant personnel to determine if this is feasible and what they might need to be able to cover the class so that the special educator could effectively use their planning time without interruption. The facilitator will be in email contact with the team to ensure that information gathered during step 4 is available and shared with the whole team at least 1 week prior to the launch meeting.
The launch meeting, teams will meet individually with their facilitator in the winter, likely at their school, where they will discuss and prioritize solutions, determine success metrics and plans, and prepare for longer-term solutions before celebrating and closing out. At each meeting, the team will revisit norms and determine whether they want to amend them. Then they'll begin step 5, where the facilitator will guide them in identifying solutions to launch, which to work on for the long term, and which will be put on hold in what we call a parking lot for the time being. Each team member will have a completed step 4 document, and the facilitator will guide them through determining where each solution falls with respect to potential impact and resources needed before making decisions about which solutions will be launched, which will be pursued for the longer term, and which will be in the parking lot. Then we'll plan for implementation and evaluation. For each solution, the team will determine their metric for success, how they'll collect data for that metric, how they'll implement the solution, and when they'll begin. We'll share an example as well to provide context in the launch meeting. And then we'll use the same process for each solution to be launched, for shifting to planning for long-term solutions. These might be ones that require a change in scheduling or hiring that can't be made until the following year or even later. At this point, we'll prepare to implement solutions, ensure good communication, prepare for next meeting, take a moment to reflect, and close out the meeting.
For the check-in meetings, teams will meet, likely at their schools, and the facilitator will attend the meeting in person or potentially virtually via Zoom. Teams will meet for 30 minutes monthly after solutions have been implemented. During these meetings, teams will complete a treatment integrity measure, evaluate solutions and revise if necessary, and get updates on long-term solutions progress. As in every meeting, they'll ensure the norms are still working well for them. Then they'll complete a short measure about the degree to which they've implemented sustain as planned. That's what we call treatment integrity. Teams will then evaluate how each solution is working using data they tracked. This does not have to be complicated. A tally sheet for protected planning time used or missed will do just fine. Next, they'll evaluate the second solution. The check-in meeting also provides dedicated, structured time to revise a solution if it isn't working as well as planned. Finally, we'll move to the long-term solutions update to continue progress. Feedback from participants in the fall highlighted how this can support teachers through potential principal turnover by providing incoming school leaders with current progress to support teachers. Then, as at every meeting, the facilitator guides the team in preparing for the next meeting, celebrating successes, and closing out.
Thank you again for watching this action-packed video on Project Sustain. We are grateful to you for your time and your prior input. I ask that you now return to the survey to share your thoughts and feedback on Sustain so that we may continue to iteratively improve it before we begin an initial test of it this coming year.